start maybe with some data clarifications. A couple of questions go in this direction. One person asks, looking at the gender pay gap across European Union countries, sees that Ireland has a lower gap than the average. Is Ireland below the European average because Ireland is at 14%, whereas the European average is 16%? Then there's a question relating to hours worked and the pay gap, and particularly for those who are working more than 40 hours a week. Many of these people are likely to be salaried and working more hours than has been counted or advised. If all the hours worked were accounted for, would this reduce the gap indicated? Then we have a question from the chat line. When we talk about women being better qualified, do we mean academically qualified? And do we need a broader definition of what qualified means? And then one last quick data related question. Is there any updated data for 2020 and about the effects of the COVID virus? So Helen, can we have you come on now and start by answering those questions?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for all the questions. So it's great to see everyone's so engaged. So on the Ireland's position, compared to other European countries. So yes, that's correct. In terms of the raw gap, Ireland has a narrower gap than the EU average. But we need to be careful when we're looking at country differences to remember that actually there's differences between countries in the level of female participation and education within countries. So what you might find is actually if very few women in some country are in the labour market, you might get quite a narrow gap because you're only getting the most qualified or women who have no children. So that can distort the relative position. So it's useful to look at the adjusted pay gap as well. So this tries to compare like with like. So it's looking at men and women with the same qualifications and the same work experience and same occupations. And what we find there is that actually when you look at that, Ireland's relative position is not quite so good. So we're lower than the EU average on the raw or unadjusted pay gap, but we're higher on the adjusted one. So there's a higher unexplained gap. So in relation to the hours worked question there, so whether people who are on salaries and doing sort of hours over and above their contracted hours, my understanding is that that's included in the CSO statistics. So people who, it's their usual hours of work. So if they're doing more than their contracted hours on a regular basis, that's included, and also unpaid or also paid on overtime is included. When I'm talking about qualifications, we're talking about all types of qualifications here. So it would include, PLCs or different things like that. But obviously, it's all educational attainment that we're looking at here, and obviously there are other skills that people bring to the labour market, and there's also a lot of skills that people learn on the job, I suppose, as well, which is what you may capture in the effective experience. The question on the whether there's any more up to date information. We don't have the post-COVID any post-COVID data on earnings yet, but it will be interesting to see what emerges in terms of the effects of COVID on unemployment. I don't know if either Fran or Karina want to come in there.
Yes. My name's Fran McGinnity. Yes, I'm a colleague of Helen Russell. I saw a question in the chat about the underperformance of boys in schools and educational attainment, and there has, yes, been worked on by ESRI colleagues, particularly Emer Smith, on why girls outperform boys. Some of this is to do with, particularly among working class boys, that being good at school is a girl's thing. So some of it is about this whole idea of stereotypes and beliefs, but in school it translates to being good in school is a girl's thing. It's also, we're doing some work about activities, sort of learning activities, reading to children that parents do when children are 3, and find that parents do more with their daughters than sons, which can potentially link in to that. But this is not the focus of this, if you know what I mean. We're focusing on potential sources of the gender pay gap, but an interesting question all the same. Another question I saw was about, how could gender roles such as care and nursing become more gender equal? There may be some hope as a result of the COVID crisis. This is just a personal thought, that actually caring and nursing may be more valued previously by Ireland in general, and its role has been highlighted and how important it is. And this may lead to somewhat more men, entering these roles. And a final question I saw in the chat was about whether working from home has led to a long hours work culture, and certainly the estimates that we have, those who are able to work at home are working longer hours. And also this links to previous findings by myself and Helen, that working from home, particularly working from home all the time, can lead to greater spillover, and not such a distinction between work and family life that people tend to get. They're more connected all the time, if you like. Okay.
Great, thank you very much for that. Moving on, here's a good question. If Helen was given a blank check and the freedom to make 3 changes or different approaches over a 10-year time frame, what would they be? Nice easy one for you, Helen.
Yeah, I would very much like to get that blank check. And I did discuss this a bit with my colleagues Karina and Fran as well. So I think in my top 3 would definitely be increased parental leave, paid parental leave that was non-transferable between mothers and fathers. And that was paid at a high replacement rate, so it was replacing the major part of people's salaries. And I think that would really encourage this greater division of labour between mothers and fathers, so a greater involvement of men in care roles, and also maybe keep women's attachment to the labour force at around childbirth, when there is a risk of women exiting employment. Now there have been some increases in paid parental leave, and there's proposals that should increase over the next few years as well. But we're starting from a very low base compared to other countries internationally. So that would be on my wish list. I think secondly, having more publicly funded childcare is crucial. Again, if we look internationally, Ireland has very high childcare costs, which is really prohibits employment amongst especially lower paid mothers. I think having that funded directly, publicly funded, would also address low pay in the childcare sector, which is really feminized, a really feminized sector, and one that's currently by low pay. So that would sort of address 2 issues there. I think maybe thirdly, greater statutory entitlement to flexible work options. At the moment, that's really down to the employer. So in some countries, there's more of a statutory entitlement to reduced working hours, especially for those with care responsibilities. So that would be another one on my wish list.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Picking up on that, there's another question that came in advance of the meeting. Is there another country with a model that has worked regarding the reduction of the gender pay gap? How do we compare to other countries? What are they doing that we aren't?
Oh. So one thing here, and I mentioned in the video, is that we see that countries that have that have a lower wage dispersion overall have a narrower gender pay gap, and those countries also tend to be the ones that have centralized wage bargaining. So these are systems where government employees and employers agree, negotiate pay more centrally. And we did have some of this model with the partnership agreements in the past. And what these centralised wage structures do is they tend to not only stop those at the bottom falling below a threshold and falling behind everyone, it also tends to moderate wages at the top, so you're not getting some groups really pulling much further away from everyone else. So that's something that I think you'll hear a bit more about from Damien's video. I don't know if Fran wanted to come in there.
Yes, in terms of leave, I suppose this family leave, time off to care, and how Ireland compares. Normally these schemes are all called different things, and there's different names. Even in Ireland there's actually quite a few names. There's maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave, paid parents leave. So when there's international comparisons and people are looking at how these compare, normally what they do is look at the duration, how long parents can take off to care for children, whether it's paid or not, which of course influences whether or not people can afford to take it, and whether it can be transferred from one parent to another, or is it just for the mother, or is there some that can just be taken from by the father? Because in Europe, in countries where this exists, normally what is found is if there's a period of non-transferable leave, use it or lose it for the father. Fathers are much more likely to take it in Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden. And this then can have a knock-on effect on their overall participation in caring for their children. It kind of shifts a little bit if they're off with the baby for 4-6 months. So in general, Ireland compares reasonably well now in terms of the total duration of leave, the total length that parents can take off if you sort of add those all up together. In terms of the payment, it doesn't score so well. So on a sort of overall ranking, both because maternity benefit, also paternity benefit and the new parents leave are paid at the lower end. It's not like they replace salaries, and then there's parental leave. There's quite a long period of leave that's unpaid. So the Ireland doesn't score so well on the payment and falls down there. And as I say, also this notion of whether it can be transferred wasn't something that was kind of common in Ireland until both the paternity leave and then this new paid parents leave. I mean, it's only 2 weeks per parent, but the idea is to lengthen it out so that there would be more of that paid. So I think that yes, Ireland is sort of heading in the right direction in recent changes, but there have been, it's starting from a very low base. That's also true. There's now a sort of recognition that the state become more involved in childcare. Previously, it was very much government policy that it wouldn't interfere in childcare.
We will be discussing childcare specifically in the care section in the new year. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Let me come, because I'm keep looking at the clock.
Sorry.
Let me come. No, it's great to get all the information and the responses. I think this is an important question to hear your views on it. It came in earlier in the week. We've heard different views on how to achieve gender equality from the advocacy groups. How do we balance different demands and perspectives of employees and employers groups? So that goes to the cost of measures. Who would like to respond to that?
I'll take that one, Catherine. So obviously everybody has a role to play in this. So there is an onus on employers and employees and the government to be, tackling the gender wage gap. But it's not surprising that employee groups and employer groups differ on, where the burden of this cost should fall. So I suppose a good example of this is the minimum wage. So we know that the introduction or the increase of a minimum wage can tackle the gender wage gap, because women are overrepresented in low paid jobs. So they benefit the most from a minimum wage, but there's an important caveat there. So they benefit the most, but only if the increase of the minimum wage doesn't result in job loss, right? So if the minimum wage is set so high that it actually means that firms can't afford it and it's going to result in job loss, because women are overrepresented in these low paid jobs, they may actually be more likely to lose a job as well. So using something like a minimum wage to tackle the gender wage gap can be quite effective, as long as it's not set so high that it results in job loss. So if you take a look at the last couple of years in Ireland, the minimum wage has increased somewhere between 1% and 6% every year. And those increases were largely based on recommendations from the Irish Low Pay Commission, which does take all of this evidence into account when it makes its recommendations. So it takes the potential employment effects and so forth into account. So what we know is that small increases in the minimum wage don't have a significant effect on employment. So the likes of the increases we've seen over the last few years, but something like increasing the minimum wage to the level of the living wage, which has been advocated for as a good policy response to the gender wage gap, now, it's likely that that would have employment effects. It's hard to quantify what they would be, but that would be a significant increase. It would be more than a 20% increase in the minimum wage, and something like that is likely to have an employment effect. I suppose another thing to keep in mind is using a minimum wage or a living wage like that to tackle the gender wage gap is good for the bottom of the wage distribution. So it works for low wage workers by bringing everyone up to a certain floor, a certain wage floor. But for people in the middle of the wage distribution or higher income people, that gender wage gap needs to be tackled with different policy instruments.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to do a sort of quick fire on some of the questions that are coming in from the chat line. One very quick factual question. What percentage of the workforce is on the minimum wage?
I think it's about 8%.
8%, okay.
Slightly more women than men.
Right. If everyone agrees that there is a gender pay gap, why doesn't the government just deal with it?
Well, I think maybe if I take that just from the presentations and the other information that you've got, you can see that it's a complex problem, and there's lots of moving parts, and there's unfortunately no magic bullet. So I think it's not, government does have a role to play across a whole range of interventions, so not only employment policies but also the family policies, but also the role of trade unions is key here. The role of employers and organizations is really crucial, and also the role of the education sector and parents in terms of socialization. So it's not, there's no quick fix. So but I think there are, as we've seen, there are lots of levers that we can pull. So I think it's a question of which ones the citizens would like to see.
Another member asks, what's the situation in Ireland regarding proposing pay equity? Could we consider similar measures to New Zealand in tackling the gender pay gap? And I suppose linked to that as well, should unions push more for better pay and conditions?
I missed the start of that. What was the thing about New Zealand?
Should we do like New Zealand? Should we follow actually propose pay parity?
Pay parity. I think, yeah, so the question here I'm looking at here about New Zealand, so it's about work for equal pay or work for equal equal value. So what we have in our legislation is actually an equal value clause, so that's what we you can take a case. It doesn't have to be exactly the same job, but it can be work of equal value. So the issue then is establishing that is the difficulty. So and often job classification schemes actually build in the bias. So I mean, I think it is important to have these discussions about what's the relative value of occupations, but it's not a straightforward exercise.
Okay, in terms of working long hours, is this discrimination against women or against parents?
There is a fair bit of evidence that most of it is against parents. So
Okay.
a lot of the gender wage gap that is unexplained appears after childbirth. Right? So that, it's not all of it, but a lot of it does appear after childbirth. And there are sort of different mechanisms for that. So after childbirth, you might find that women want to sort into jobs that are more flexible. They trade off flexibility for pay. They have had a career interruption, so they might be coming in at a lower scale or retraining, and they might want to work part-time. So all of these things explain some of the gender wage gap after childbirth, but there is an unexplained portion that does get larger and persist after childbirth.
Okay.
And
now we have just 5
can
minutes left. So
oh, right.
if we could
Yeah.
be very brief. No, Fran, just very briefly.
Yeah, and we also found in previous work that Helen and I did on time use, that's where people fill out diaries of how they spend their days, that parents, that men tend to work more after the birth, you know, the men with children tend to work more and women tend to work less than before men and women with children, before they have children.
Okay. 2 questions on quotas. Do gender quotas devalue people's actual skills, giving the perception that the person is only in the job because of the quota? And the second quota question, do quotas need to be legislated?
So, I mean, it's probably worth saying that quotas are very rarely used actually in the labour market, so they're very uncommon. As I said, the female professorships is one of the very few examples. There are in the civil service, there's a gender balanced target, so it's for senior roles, but it's only where there's equal merit, and you do find a backlash against quotas, that even if it's a very mild form of quota or target, but the evidence that in the States, I suppose, it's that where it's more common for in government contracts and things, that actually, you know, there's no sense when they do the measurement, there's no sense that actually the merit of the people who and the productivity of those people is any less if they get the job through a quota. But there is this kind of backlash. Yeah.
There's a perception rather than reality. Can we just finish with, I'm going to link 3 questions relating to the COVID situation together, and we'll make this the last one, and then we will ask you off air to respond to the other questions so that we get a full responses. So first one is, if COVID continues, how will this impact on the workforce, and how do we change to suit the new norms? Then second question is, one gender now more employable due to changes due to COVID? And then in the US, women are dropping out of the labour force due to COVID. Jobs are vanishing, no supports. What's happening here? So maybe just if the 3 of you could touch on that.
Start on that if you want, and my colleagues can pick up. So as Helen said earlier on, we don't have good data on how COVID is affecting these things at the moment, but we can certainly speculate based on international evidence and on, you know, what has happened in previous recessions and things like that. So we know that women were slightly more affected by job loss than COVID, but they may also have disproportionately reduced their work hours voluntarily to take on caring responsibilities for children and the elderly. And this kind of career interruption is likely to have a knock-on effect on career progression in the future, and to ultimately increase the gender wage gap in the future. So that is possibly, that's one kind of, I say, downside of the career interruption suffered by women during COVID. On the other hand, while women did shoulder most of the extra burden of caring, there's also evidence that men did increase their hours of caring too. And this could go some way to reducing stereotypes and traditional gender divisions of work and caring roles, which could kind of go in the other direction, if you like. Also, the increased flexibility that was offered by many employers out of necessity during the pandemic is likely to continue to some degree, at least in the future. And this could result in increased female labour market attachment, where they find that they no longer have to make these huge trade-offs between salary and flexibility. So in short, there are positives and negatives to be taken from this at the moment, and we don't really know which one is going to dominate.
Okay, any final reflection from Helen?
Well, just on that working from home, I think that that may have the effect of normalising at least some forms of flexibility amongst men. So I think that could be a positive influence, and it does look like employers are going to continue with more of that in the future, even after the pandemic.
Okay. Yes, Fran?
In terms of men's involvement in caring, there is evidence as well from other countries that if men have been involved in caring, then this is one way of breaking down gender roles within the family. Then they continue to do more if they have been doing more.
Practice makes perfect, they say. Okay, I'd like to thank Helen, Fran and Karina very much for being with us this morning and for answering so many questions so quickly. We'll ask you to continue by answering in the coming days the remaining questions that we didn't get around to, but it's been extremely helpful, I think, to be able to put the questions directly from the members of the Assembly to you. So thanks very much for your help today. Now,